in the dry, sun-scorched reaches of Dustwell County, where tumbleweeds rolled like restless spirits across the cracked earth and the wind whispered stories of better days, lived a man named Jacob Merrick. His ranch sat at the edge of a forgotten, trailing old, weary patch of land his father had once called a blessing from God and his grandfather had said was worth every blister. But now, with the third drought in 5 years choking every hope from the soil, Jacob wasn't sure what to call it anymore. He just knew he was tired. His boots were worn, soles flapping like tongues with every step, and his hands were cracked and calloused from too many seasons spent coaxing life from dead land. The sun had browned his skin and bleached his hair. His beard was more survival than style, and his clothes hung loose not for fashion, but because the food had been getting scarcer. He hadn't eaten more than dried beans and stale bread in 3 days. The ranch once a modest but thriving patch of livestock, chickens and corn, now looked more like a forgotten cemetery for dreams. The barn leaned crookedly to the side, as if too tired to stand. 3 of his 5 cows had died the month before, poisoned by a tainted water trough he hadn't been able to afford to fix. The other 2 stood like statues in the heat, ribs showing, flies circling their dull eyes. Jacob had tried everything's old tools, bartered old furniture, even chopped firewood for wealthier ranchers just to keep a little grain on the table. He'd written letters to distant relatives, swallowed his pride, begged his neighbors, and finally gave up all of it. One by one, people stopped responding. The bank didn't want to hear his excuses. They just wanted the land that was, technically, still worth something, even if it was dying. Every knock at his door made him flinch. Was it the banker again? Or old man Trumbull, wanting the debt for the broken water pump? Or the sheriff delivering a notice that this time, they weren't just talking this time, they'd really take it all? So, when the knock came just past sunset one August evening, Jacob didn't move for a long time. He just sat at the table, staring at the cracked mug in his hand. The knock came again. Firmer this time. He sighed, stood, and opened the door, expecting bad news. But standing there wasn't a debt collector or a neighbor. It was a stranger, a woman. She wore a wide hat with the brim pulled low, a long coat that was far too warm for summer, and gloves. Strange, Jacob thought, for someone in this heat to wear gloves. But then again, people passed through Dustwell sometimes on their way to nowhere, and those people often dressed like they were hiding something. Jacob Merrick, she asked. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was something beneath it, like someone used to giving orders and expecting obedience. He nodded slowly. That's me. She didn't smile. Instead, she pulled a piece of parchment from her coat pocket and held it out. I heard you need a cow. That caught him off guard. Not just the words, but the way she said it, like it was an offer no sane man would turn down. I guess I do, Jacob said cautiously. You marry me, she said, and I'll give you one. Healthy, young, not bred yet, but she will be one of the finest you'll see. Jacob blinked. You're asking me to marry you for a cow? She nodded once. No tricks, no games, just a straight deal. I need a marriage. You need livestock. We sign a paper, say some words in front of someone who can bless it, and we both get what we want. Jacob looked out past her to the road, where he now noticed a small cart hitched to a dark-coated ox. A brown cow stood beside it, tied gently to a stake. Sure enough, she looked strong, well-fed, clean eyes. The kind of cow a man could build a herd from again, and that was the moment he realized just how far gone he was. He was considering marrying a stranger for livestock. What's your name? He asked. You can call me Clara, she replied. Where are you from? Does it matter? I guess not, Jacob admitted. Just, why me? Clara's eyes narrowed, because no one else would ask those questions, and no one else is desperate enough to say yes. She was right, and that stung, but it also gave him a strange kind of respect for her. Honesty like that, even if it came wrapped in thorns, was hard to find these days. You religious? He asked. No. Got any folks? Dead. Jacob paused, weighing what little he knew. Everything about her was off, mysterious, deliberate, unsettling, but the cow was real. The need was realer. All right, he said finally, we'll do it tomorrow. There's a preacher comes through every Friday. I'll send word tonight. She nodded once and turned without another word. Jacob watched her walk away, wondering if this was the worst decision he'd ever made or, maybe the best. The ceremony had taken less than 5 minutes, a half-hearted string of vows murmured before a sleepy traveling preacher. An exchange of rings Eli had found in a rusted drawer, and a blessing mumbled with more dust than conviction. No music, no guests, no celebration, just a dry wind blowing through the chapel's broken window panes and the creak of floorboards under hesitant feet. Eli Walker had married a woman he didn't know, and now she was his wife. She told him her name was May. No last name, no story, no explanation, just May. And he could feel, even in the first few moments of standing beside her at the altar, that there was a wall around her, thick, impenetrable, and deliberate. She didn't lean into him during the ceremony. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at him. Not really. Her gaze always drifted elsewhere, over his shoulder, into a corner, or to the open window where the orange sky hung like a question. That evening, they returned to his ranch house, if you could still call it a house. It was more of a husk, worn down by years of storms, sun, and solitude. The paint had peeled away decades ago. The front door creaked like an old man's bones. The screen hung loose, swaying in the breeze like a ghost with nothing better to do. May stepped inside without a word. She moved with the kind of confidence that made Eli pause, not because it was bold, but because it was familiar. Like she had already lived here in another life, and knew where everything belonged. He had expected, at the very least, some questions. Where should I sleep? Do you want me to cook something? Do you have any tea? But she asked nothing. Instead, she hung her coat on the crooked hook near the door, sat down at the old pine wood table, and began to undo the laces of her boots. Eli cleared his throat. Hope beans and cornbread are all right. Ain't much else left. Unless you like canned peaches. She nodded, one slow, steady motion. He waited for something more, a thank you, maybe, or even a joke, but nothing came. Just that calm, unnerving silence. In the small windowless kitchen, Eli moved around, nervously, pulling pans from dusty shelves, lighting the stove, and opening the last jar of beans he'd set aside for emergencies. It struck him how surreal the moment was, preparing dinner for a wife he hadn't expected to have, in a home that had grown used to loneliness. He'd once believed the house had learned to breathe with him, the way the walls expanded in the summer heat and contracted in winter chill, the way the wind whispered through the cracks with voices only solitude could recognize. Now, it felt like it was holding its breath. He turned to ask her if she wanted tea, but she was already at the fireplace, stoking the embers with a precision that suggested she had done it 100 times before. Again, she said nothing. She didn't ask where the woodpile was, didn't ask if the flue was open, just worked calmly, purposefully, with hands that knew fire like a friend. Dinner was served in silence. Eli pulled out a chair for her, more out of awkward habit than chivalry, and sat across from her at the narrow table. The lantern flickered between them, casting their shadows on the walls like figures in a puppet play. May spooned beans onto her plate, tore a piece of cornbread, and Hoffen began to eat. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if every bite had meaning or purpose. Eli cleared his throat again. The cow's a beauty. I mean it. She's young, strong. Where'd you find her? May looked up. Her expression didn't change. She nodded once, then returned to her meal. I suppose I ought to thank you, Eli continued. Not just for the cow, but, well, I guess for everything. You didn't have to do this. Marry a stranger. I mean, she looked at him again, this time a little longer. Not angrily, not kindly, just looking, studying, and then she said the first full sentence he'd heard since the wedding. You needed something, so did I. Her voice was low, like thunder far off in the hills. Not threatening, just old, worn, like it had been used to say important things and had long since given up on the small ones. Eli didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. After they ate, May gathered the dishes without being asked and began to clean them at the cracked sink. The water came out in weak spurts, rust-colored and lukewarm. She didn't flinch. Eli watched her from the chair, unsure if he should offer help or just let her be. Every action she took was smooth, wordless, and eerie in its familiarity. She knew how to hold the dish just right under the flickering light, knew how to scrub the pan in circles that made no noise, knew how to breathe without drawing attention to it. She moved like someone used to walking alone. Later, as the wind picked up outside and the lantern's light began to dim, she walked to the window and stood there. Just stood, watching. Eli came up beside her, slowly. You waiting for someone? She didn't answer. He looked out, trying to see what she saw, but there was nothing. Just the barn, the fence line, and the endless darkness beyond. You all right, May? Still no answer, just silence. Then, without turning her head, she spoke again, soft, measured, but haunting. They're late. Eli blinked. Who's late? She didn't reply. The rest of the night passed in an uneasy quiet. Eli offered her the bedroom, said he'd take the rocking chair near the fire. She nodded once and disappeared into the back room. He sat awake for hours, listening. Not to sounds, there were none, but to the absence of them. No footsteps, no cough, no shifting on the bed, just that stillness. He tried to convince himself it was normal, that she was just tired, that people had different ways of settling into new places, that maybe she was just quiet by nature. But the truth itched at the edge of his thoughts. There was something about her, something that moved deeper than silence, attention beneath the surface, a kind of waiting, and as he drifted off to sleep in the creaky old chair, one last thought drifted through Eli's mind like a ghost. He was used to silence, but not this kind. Eli watched the flame flicker in the lantern as it neared its end, casting long shadows that danced and crawled across the worn-out walls of the cabin. The silence between them had stretched into hours by now. He had spoken here and there, light, nervous attempts to bridge the distance between himself and the quiet, mysterious woman who now bore the legal title of wife. But she had responded only in nods, single syllables, or with that same unreadable look she'd worn since the moment they met. A look that was neither cold nor warm, just watchful. And now, the night had settled fully around them. The desert outside the ranch had gone pitch, the kind of dark that crept under the door cracks and whispered to the bones. The coyotes had gone silent, as if even they were uneasy. A storm had passed through a few days prior, dragging dust and broken branches across the land. But tonight, there was no wind, just the pressure of still air thick with expectation. Eli stood up from the table and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well," he muttered, trying to sound casual, "I suppose it's time to turn in." May didn't reply. She had remained by the window since dinner, arms folded, head tilted slightly to one side as she stared out across the plains. She hadn't moved in over 20 minutes. It was unnerving. He cleared his throat. "I'll take the rocker by the fire. It's not much, but it's soft enough to sleep in. You can take the bedroom." Still, no reply. Eli hesitated, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement. Finally, she turned, not fast, not slow, and walked past him, her boots barely making a sound against the creaking floorboards. She moved like water flowing downhill, inevitable, quiet, unstoppable. Her footsteps echoed in his chest more than in his ears. She reached the hallway and paused at the bedroom door. For a moment, Eli thought she might say something, but instead, she opened the door, stepped inside, and with a soft click, turned the key in the lock. Eli froze. His eyes drifted to the door handle. The locked bedroom. His bedroom. He hadn't expected, well, anything really. He didn't know what he had expected. They were married, yes, but not romantically. It had been a trade. A cow for a name. A ring for survival. Still, he had thought, perhaps foolishly, that there would be something shared between them. Not affection, maybe, but a spark of trust. Of safety. But now she had locked herself inside. No explanation. No words. Just the sound of a turning key. He stepped closer to the door and placed a tentative hand on the wooden frame. It felt cold, colder than it should have, like the door had absorbed some foreign chill. He leaned forward slightly and whispered, "May?" No response. His knuckles hovered over the wood, unsure whether to knock. "Are you okay?" he asked, this time slightly louder. "I just want to make sure you're all right." Silence. He waited. His hand dropped to his side. He stared at the door as if it might suddenly unlock on its own, as if she might open it and explain everything. Her silence, her past, the look in her eyes, but nothing happened. The seconds dragged into minutes, then 10, then 20. He considered knocking again but hesitated. What would that accomplish? If she wanted to speak, she would. If she wanted to open the door, she would. But she didn't do. With a sigh that seemed to sink through the floor, Eli turned away. He walked slowly back toward the hearth, each step heavier than the last, and lowered himself into the old rocking chair. It groaned beneath his weight, the sound like a long tired sigh. The fire had burned low, casting weak orange light onto the floor. Shadows loomed high on the walls, stretching into unnatural shapes that shifted as he moved. He tried to make sense of it all. He'd married a stranger. Yes, out of desperation. But still, he had treated her with courtesy. Respect. He had fed her, offered her a place to stay, a home, and yet she had locked him out, both literally and otherwise. There was a strange unease in his chest, a hollowness. He glanced once more down the hall, toward the closed bedroom door. There was no light beneath it, no sound from within, just silence, the kind of silence that felt intentional, the kind that pressed against the ears. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up, not loud, just steady, whispering through the cracks in the walls, curling around the corners of the cabin like fingers reaching for something. The fire snapped quietly. A log collapsed inward. Sparks floated up the chimney like tiny, desperate prayers. Eli sat there for what felt like hours. At some point, his hand drifted to his chest, just to feel the steady beat of his heart. It was a nervous habit he'd developed years ago during a particularly cruel winter. Nights like this, nights filled with quiet, strange tension, always made him wonder if the world was trying to tell him something. He leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes, trying to find rest. But it didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, every flicker of the fire made his eyes open again, and always. His gaze would drift back to that door, still closed, still locked, and behind it, the woman he'd married. Only hours ago, who was she? Why had she come? Why did she keep looking at the sky? And why, despite all logic, did he have the feeling that locking that door hadn't been for her protection, but for his? The sun cracked over the horizon like a slow yawn, casting pale orange light across the arid plains of the ranch. The wind was still, but the chill of dawn hadn't yet faded. Eli awoke with a sharp inhale, the stiffness of the wooden rocking chair gnawing into his spine and neck. His arms had fallen asleep, and he flexed his fingers slowly, shaking off the numbness. It took him a moment to orient himself. to remember where he was, and more importantly, why he hadn't slept in his own bed. Then it came flooding back. The marriage, the silence, the locked door, the woman, May, and suddenly, he was on his feet. The house was eerily quiet. He moved toward the hallway, every step quick and cautious, heart thudding louder than his boots. When he reached the bedroom door, it was slightly ajar. The lock that had barred him from entry just hours earlier, now hung useless, turned open. For a second, he hesitated, then pushed the door slowly inward. The room was empty, no sign of a person having slept in the bed. The covers were undisturbed, smooth and cold to the touch. The pillow held no indentation. The water basin was full, the towel unused. It was as if no one had even stepped foot inside. May, he called softly, but his voice cracked halfway through. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. May, still no answer. He stepped back into the main room and looked around. Everything was in its place. The lantern he'd extinguished before dawn, the leftover cornbread wrapped in a cloth, the dying embers in the fireplace. He crossed the room in quick strides and opened the front door. Outside, the ranch looked just as it always had, tired, dry, half broken from years of neglect. But something was missing. He scanned the yard. The cow was gone, so was the cart, so was the ox. He turned in a slow circle, stepping out into the dirt barefoot, his heart now hammering. No sign of tracks but for a single trail of hoofprints, 4 sets, headed toward the road. May, he shouted this time, the name ripped from his throat. Make, where the hell are you? Nothing, only silence. And the distant creak of something settling in the barn. He sprinted across the yard to the barn, slamming the doors open so hard they rattled. Empty, no cow, no woman, just the smell of old straw and the bones of a forgotten wheelbarrow. His breath came hard and ragged now. He ran to the backfield. The well, the chicken coop, the dried stream. She was nowhere, gone completely, as if she'd vanished into the air, like dust in the wind. Eli stood in the middle of the field, hands on his hips, staring across the prairie. The sky stretched wide and indifferent, the kind of sky that had watched thousands of people come and go, succeed and fail, live and die. His jaw clenched. Was this some kind of joke? A scam? Had she tricked him for the cow? But why the whole act? Why marry him just to vanish? Then something caught his eye. Back on the porch, a faint fluttering. He turned and walked slowly back toward the house. As he approached the table inside, he saw it, a folded piece of paper, weathered and sun-kissed, sitting dead center, weighed down by something small and metallic. His wedding ring, the same one he had placed on her hand the day before. Now it sat cold and dull on top of the letter, like a symbol of everything he couldn't understand. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand, feeling the faint warmth from the sunlight still lingering in the metal. Then he slid the paper out from beneath it and slowly unfolded it. The note was short, just a few lines, scrawled in precise, almost mechanical handwriting. You will not see me again. You gave what I needed, and I thank you. Do not follow. The cow is only part of the debt. What was taken and what was left will balance in time. No signature. No name. Just that. Eli sat down slowly in the same chair he'd fallen asleep in, eyes fixed on the letter. His mind raced. What debt? What was taken? What was left? He looked around the house again, trying to spot anything she might have left. A bag, a shawl, a footprint. But there was nothing. He dropped his head into his hands. This wasn't just a theft. This wasn't just abandonment. This was something stranger, darker. It didn't feel like he'd been conned by a clever drifter. It felt like he'd been chosen for something, played into something he didn't understand. He replayed every moment in his head. The knock, the deal, her silence, the door locking, the unreadable eyes, the sky dash gazing. What had she meant? The cow was only part of the debt. And what, exactly, had he given her? His name, his ring, or something else? He felt cold, not just from the early morning breeze drifting through the door, but from something deeper. A sense of having been used in a game whose rules he never knew he was playing. And yet, as he looked at the hoofprints leading away from the ranch, stretching far toward the horizon, a small voice in his head whispered the question that would haunt him for months, maybe years. What if she didn't steal anything at all? What if she left exactly what she was supposed to, and took only what she needed to survive something he couldn't imagine? Eli stood there, alone on the porch, holding the note in one hand, the ring in the other, while the wind began to rise again, whispering its secrets across the plains. The paper in Eli's hands had begun to tremble, not from wind, but from the subtle, steady quiver in his fingers. He wasn't entirely aware he was shaking until he noticed how the inked letters on the page began to blur, not because of the paper, but because of the sudden wetness in his eyes. He blinked hard. The tears didn't fall, but they threatened. He sat down slowly on the porch bench, laid the ring beside him, and read the note again. And again. Each time, the words remained the same, cryptic, emotionless, final. You will not see me again. You gave what I needed, and I thank you. Do not follow. The cow was only part of the debt. What was taken and what was left will balance in time. He read the last line aloud. What was taken and what was left will balance in time. It echoed oddly in the stillness of the ranch. The sun had risen higher by now, and the heat was returning. Somewhere, a bird let out a shrill cry, and the wind stirred dust in lazy spirals across the dry yard. But inside Eli's chest, everything was tightening confusion, suspicion, fear, and something else. Memory. Not the kind that knocks politely. The kind that grabs you by the collar and drags you back through time. Eli stood up, his breath shallow. A sudden thought had pierced his haze. The attic, he hadn't been up there in years. Not since before his father died. And before that, he could remember his grandfather warning him never to mess with what's boxed up there. Of course, as a child, he thought it was just old man talk. But now, in the eerie light of May's disappearance and the message she'd left behind, a sharp connection clicked. His grandfather's journal. He remembered it, suddenly an old, leather-bound volume, cracked with age, filled with strange entries. Tales of storms that came without clouds, a cow that gave black milk, a fire that burned cold. But the strangest stories, the ones his father used to call dustborn madness, were always about a woman. A woman who didn't age, who appeared in different forms, always plain, sometimes beautiful, sometimes frighteningly still. She would come to the men of the Merrick line not often, not regularly, but always at the brink of something, always offering something in exchange for something else. Always making a bargain. Eli rushed back into the house. Heart pounding, his boots echoing sharply on the old wooden floorboards. Dust motes danced in the morning light as he pulled the cord that dropped the attic ladder. It creaked down like a groaning skeleton. He ascended quickly, each step stirring up years of cobwebs and forgotten shadows. The attic smelled of old cedar, dried hay, and time. Boxes and crates lined the beams. Eli knew exactly where to look. He found the truncan old iron-banded chest tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt. The lock was rusted, but a swift kick and a crowbar made short work of it. Inside were the relics of a lifetime, black and white photos, letters, medals from the war. But there, at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the journal. He unwrapped it slowly, the leather cracked in his hands. Dry as snow. The cover read simply, E. Merrick, 1921, his grandfather. Eli opened it gently, flipping past sketches, weather logs, pages written in scrawled shorthand. Then he found it, a section marked, The Bargain Woman. He read, She came again today, just as PA said she would. Just as the stories in the family go, the woman with no past, no shadow, and no name. She knocked on the door right after the crops failed, and right before I thought of walking into the woods and never walking back out. She offered a trade, never money, never food, always a living thing. Once it was a horse. Another time, a goat. This time, it was a cow. But there's always a price, a hidden one. You don't pay it up front, you pay it later. Sometimes in years. Sometimes in generations. She speaks of balance. Of old debts, of bloodlines. Says we owe something, not just the Merricks, but men like us, who've drawn from the land and never given back what we took. I asked her once, why me? She said, because your line remembers, even when you forget, and remembering is dangerous. Eli felt goosebumps rise along his arms. He flipped another page. A sketch had been drawn rough but striking. A woman, with a long coat, a wide hat, gloves. His breath caught. It was her, May. Or someone who looked exactly like her. Drawn decades ago by a man long dead. Eli read on. She took my brother once. Not with violence, not with chains. She just asked him to follow. And he did. He smiled, thanked me for the meal, and never returned. Ma cried for weeks. But Pa just stared at the fire, muttering about debts coming due. I don't know who she is. Maybe a witch, maybe a spirit, maybe something older. But I do know this, when she knocks, and you answer, your life is no longer yours. It belongs to the balance. Eli sat back, stunned. His mind reeled. What kind of family secret had he just stumbled into? Was May not just a drifter, not a runaway bride or a clever thief? Was she part of something much bigger? Some ancient ritual, a myth walking in daylight? He thought about her strange words, how she'd spoken so little, how she locked the door, how she stared at the stars. He remembered her eyes, how they never really blinked, how they watched him like he was already a memory. And the line in her note, you gave what I needed. What had he given? His name, his freedom, or something deeper, passed through blood? Eli looked out the attic window. The hoofprints in the dirt below had already begun to fade in the wind. But the truth had only begun to emerge. He now knew she wasn't random. She didn't pick him out of desperation. She came because of who he was. Because she had been coming to Merrick men for 100 years. Because the cow, the wedding, the note, it was all part of something older. Older than him, older than the ranch, older than anyone still alive could explain. Time, as it does, marched on quietly, relentlessly. Like the sun creeping across the floor of a room you stopped noticing years ago. For Eli Walker, the years that followed May's departure weren't filled with loud heartbreak or sweeping drama. They were filled with something heavier, quiet, a heavy, thoughtful quiet. In the first few weeks after she vanished, he kept expecting her to return riding up the path, on that same cow, with that same blank, unreadable expression, as though the entire thing had been a test, or a misunderstanding, or maybe even a cruel joke. But the days passed, and the silence deepened. At first, he stayed up late, hoping to see her silhouette on the ridge, hoping to hear the soft thud of hooves in the dirt. He even slept on the porch, some nights, a loaded rifle across his lap, not to hurt her, but to protect her, if need be. Because he didn't feel angry, he didn't feel betrayed, he felt haunted, not by ghosts in the way most people use the word, but by her memory, by the space she'd taken up in his life for those few strange days, by the questions she'd left behind, and by what she'd awoken in him, something ancient, something he felt pulsing under the earth itself. He never remarried. The townsfolk tried now and then. He was a good man, after all, hard-working, stoic, the kind of man who, despite his misfortunes, didn't wallow. But he always turned their offers down gently, as if he knew there wasn't space left inside him for another. Not after her, because while May had taken the cow with her, and while she had locked that door with such finality, she had also opened another door inside Eli, one that never quite closed. A door to memory, to mystery, to myth. As the years unfurled like weathered parchment, Eli rebuilt the ranch, slowly, carefully. He repaired fences, replanted what he could, tended to new cattle, acquired honestly this time, no vows attached, and little by little, the land softened to him again. But something in Eli had changed. He became known as a man who thought before he spoke, a man who listened to the wind as if it whispered something only he could understand, a man who never rushed, never panicked, and never, ever dismissed the strange or the unexplained. The townspeople noticed this. They noticed how Eli often walked the ridge alone, gazing toward the horizon as if waiting for something, how he never allowed the old guest room in his house to be used again, though it was the only one with a full view of the stars, how he spoke kindly to animals, how he marked the solstices with candles in his window, and how he never ever told the full story of what happened that wedding night. When asked, he'd smile faintly and say something like, "It was a trade that didn't quite balance," or, "Some debts ain't meant to be paid in coin." But he never spoke her name, not aloud, not once. He kept the note she left in a small wooden box, alongside his grandfather's journal and the ring she'd taken off. Every year, on the anniversary of their brief marriage, he would open it, read it slowly, and sit in silence until the stars came out. It was on such a night, 15 years after she vanished, that Eli first saw the hoofprint. He had been walking the perimeter fence, oil lantern in hand, when he noticed it, just one, pressed into the dirt beside the well, sharp, fresh, and he knew, instantly, it hadn't come from any of his cattle. The print was too perfect, too deliberate. He stared at it for a long time, then smiled, shook his head, and whispered, "You still out there?" It wasn't the only time, once every few years, always at night. Always when the stars formed a particular crooked line overhead, he'd find another hoofprint, sometimes near the well, once by the barn, another time just outside his bedroom window. Never to prints, never tracks, just one, a calling card. He never tried to follow them, not because he was afraid, though he might have been, but because he understood something now. She didn't want to be followed, she wanted to be remembered. And Eli did remember her, not just her face, but her presence, her stillness, the strange warmth in her hands when they'd touched, the way she had watched the sky like someone listening for music the rest of the world had forgotten. As the years turned his hair gray and his body slower, Eli began to dream more often, and in his dreams, she came back. Not always as May, sometimes younger, sometimes older, sometimes dressed in velvet, sometimes in rags, sometimes with the cow beside her, and other times alone, her feet bare, her eyes brighter than fire. In every dream, she said the same thing: "Balance is coming. Be ready." He didn't know what it meant, but he believed her. Eventually, people stopped asking Eli why he never left the ranch, never visited family, never tried to sell the land, and moved to the city. He would have told them this because he was waiting, not for her return. He knew she wouldn't come back, not in the way people expected, but for the moment when her purpose would be revealed. For the day, the debt, whatever it was, would finally be paid in full. In one quiet night, when Eli was old and the fire had burned low, he closed his eyes and slipped into a dream where May stood at the edge of the field. She didn't speak, she only extended her hand. He took it and was never seen again.